On Father's Day, my son sent me a gift box that was meant to be a surprise. My wife took one look at it and immediately told me not to open it. Confused, I leaned in for a closer look and froze. Something wasn't right. Just 5 minutes later, the police arrived. Before we begin, if you're watching this, feel free to subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Now, let me tell you a story I'll never forget. I sat on my back porch overlooking the serene waters of the lake, watching the morning mist rise from the surface like ghosts of better times. At 68, my weathered hands told the story of 4 decades I'd spent as a civil engineer. Calloused from early construction sites, scarred from drafting tools, but steady as the foundations I'd designed. These same hands had signed countless checks over the years, each one representing another piece of my carefully constructed retirement dreams being chipped away. The irony wasn't lost on me that a man who'd spent his career building structures to last had somehow failed to construct boundaries within my own family. Every extra shift I'd worked, every vacation Margaret had planned, that we'd canceled to cover another of Ethan's emergencies, every possession we'd quietly sold. When our son's latest crisis demanded immediate financial intervention, it all felt like construction in reverse, tearing down rather than building up. Margaret emerged from the kitchen carrying 2 cups of coffee, her silver hair catching the early sunlight. She'd been a librarian for 30 years, a woman who understood the importance of order and consequences. Yet even she had become complicit in our son's financial dependency. The weight of our shared enablement sat between us like an uninvited guest. At every meal, every quiet evening, every moment when the phone rang and we both tensed, knowing it would likely be Ethan with another urgent request. The breaking point had come just 2 weeks earlier, during what was supposed to be a celebratory dinner for our anniversary. Ethan and his wife Lena had arrived, with practiced smiles and rehearsed gratitude. But within an hour, the conversation had inevitably turned to money. Another investment opportunity, another temporary setback, another plea disguised as a business proposition. When I had finally suggested that perhaps it was time for them to solve their own financial problems, Ethan's mask had slipped completely. His accusation still echoed in my mind. Selfish, hoarding wealth while my own son struggled. The words had cut deep, not because they were true, but because they revealed how thoroughly my decades of sacrifice had been misunderstood and manipulated. Standing in my modest dining room, surrounded by furniture we'd kept for 20 years, because every spare dollar had gone to our children, I had experienced a moment of crystalline clarity that felt both devastating and liberating. Now, as I sipped my coffee and watched a great blue heron wade through the shallows, I knew that the foundation of our family dynamic was crumbling. The question wasn't whether it would collapse completely, but whether I had the strength to rebuild something healthier from the ruins. The silence that followed Ethan's explosive departure stretched across our small lakeside house like a heavy fog. For 3 days, I found myself checking my phone obsessively, part of me hoping for reconciliation, another part dreading the inevitable next phase of manipulation. Margaret moved through our home like a woman mourning, her librarian's methodical nature disrupted by the emotional chaos our family had become. I used those quiet days to mentally catalog the true cost of my decades-long financial support, the overtime hours at the engineering firm that had stolen years from my marriage, working weekends on bridge inspections, while other men my age played golf or took their wives to dinner. I remembered selling my father's vintage fishing tackle, pieces that had connected me to memories of childhood summers, to cover Ethan's gambling debts during his 20s. There was the second mortgage we'd taken on our modest home to fund Lena's boutique venture, a business that had folded within 18 months, while leaving us with payments that would extend well into our 70s. Each sacrifice I'd made willingly, wrapped in the parental conviction that this time would be different, that our son would finally find his footing. Instead, I now understood with painful clarity. Each rescue had only taught Ethan that consequences could be avoided. That responsibility was optional when parents were available to cushion every fall. Margaret's torn loyalties manifested in sleepless nights and tear-stained mornings. She would start sentences defending Ethan, then trail off as the weight of evidence mounted against him. Her love for our grandchildren, 8-year-old Emma and 6-year-old Connor, had become both her greatest joy and her deepest vulnerability. The children were innocent parties in their parents' financial recklessness, yet I knew they were also being weaponized, in ways that made my chest tighten with both rage and sorrow. The first message arrived on Thursday evening, innocuous enough to seem coincidental. A photo of my grandchildren at a school event, accompanied by text noting how much they missed their grandfather, how they wondered why I never called anymore. The second came Friday morning, a casual mention of summer plans that might take the family far from Oregon, depending on various factors that remained unnamed but clearly understood. By Saturday, the subtext had crystallized into something more direct but still carefully veiled. References to children needing stability, to grandparents who prioritized money over family relationships, to decisions that couldn't be undone once certain lines were crossed. I recognized the escalating pattern, the same progression from plea to pressure to threat, that had characterized our financial relationship for years, now applied to the most precious currency of all, access to my grandchildren. Father's Day morning arrived, with the kind of crystalline Oregon sunlight that made the lake surface shimmer like scattered diamonds. I had awakened early, as had become my habit since retirement, and was reviewing structural blueprints from my engineering days, when the rumble of a delivery truck interrupted the peaceful silence. Through the kitchen window, I watched a uniformed driver approach our front door carrying a medium-sized cardboard box, unremarkable except for the careful way the man held it, as if it contained something fragile or valuable. For a fleeting moment, my heart lifted with the possibility that perhaps my grandchildren had managed to send something despite their parents' manipulative games. Emma had always been artistic, creating elaborate drawings that decorated my refrigerator, while Connor showed an early fascination with building blocks that reminded me of my own childhood dreams of construction and design. Maybe, somehow, they had found a way to reach across the chasm their parents had created. Margaret emerged from the bathroom, her silver hair still damp from her shower, and joined me at the front door as I signed for the package. The return address was generic, a shipping store in Portland, with no identifying information about the actual sender. As I lifted the box, I immediately noticed its unusual weight distribution, as if the contents had shifted during transport, settling into an uneven mass that felt strangely organic. It was Margaret who first noticed the tiny punctures along the box's edges, perfectly round holes no larger than pencil tips, but deliberately placed and too precisely spaced to be accidental damage from shipping. Her librarian's eye for detail had always been sharper than my engineer's focus on larger structural elements, and she pointed out the anomalies with growing concern. Then we both heard it, a subtle rustling from within the cardboard walls, accompanied by what sounded disturbingly like the faint hiss of escaping air, or something far more sinister. The box seemed to pulse slightly in my hands, as if whatever lay inside was moving, shifting, responding to our voices and proximity. The realization hit me like a physical blow, a cold dread that started in my stomach and spread through my chest like ice water. This was no Father's Day gift from loving grandchildren. This was something alive, something deliberately confined in darkness, and sent to our doorstep with malicious intent. Margaret's whispered observation cut through my shock like a blade. The breathing holes, the movement, the deliberate anonymity. Someone had sent us a living creature with the express purpose of causing fear, harm, or both. And deep in my engineer's logical mind, I was already making connections I desperately hoped were wrong. The snake that Officer Damon Price and the animal control specialist extracted from the box was a venomous copperhead, its triangular head and heat-sensing pits unmistakably designed for harm. As I watched the professionals handle the creature with careful expertise, my mind raced through the logistics of acquiring and shipping such a dangerous animal, the kind of deliberate malice that required planning, resources, and a complete abandonment of human decency. The confirmation came 3 days later. When I reviewed my credit card statements with the methodical precision my engineering career had instilled in me, there, among the routine charges for groceries and utilities, was a suspicious transaction, a payment to an exotic animal dealer in Nevada, processed just 1 week before Father's Day. The amount was modest enough to avoid my immediate attention, but the timing and location created a paper trail that led directly back to Ethan. That discovery crystallized something fundamental in my understanding of our family dynamic. For decades, I had rationalized my son's behavior as weakness, immaturity, or poor judgment, character flaws that might be corrected with enough patience and financial support. But sending a venomous snake to his own father's doorstep crossed a line that transformed my disappointment into something far more serious. This wasn't desperation or reckless spending. This was calculated cruelty designed to terrorize Margaret and me in our own home. The process of severing financial ties felt like dismantling a structure I had spent decades building. Each canceled automatic transfer and closed account, representing another support beam I was removing from my son's artificial lifestyle. I approached the task with the same systematic methodology I had once applied to blueprint reviews, identifying every point of connection and eliminating it with deliberate precision. Joint accounts, authorized user privileges, emergency credit cards, all of it carefully documented and methodically terminated. When Ethan's panicked call came the following week, his voice tight with the realization that his financial safety net had vanished, I felt no satisfaction, only a profound sense of completion. My son's indirect admission of guilt about the package, couched in vague references to misunderstandings and overreactions, only confirmed what I already knew. The threats about keeping my grandchildren away, once so effective in controlling my behavior, now seemed hollow and predictable. As I sat on my porch that evening, watching the sun set over the lake, I understood that the cycle of enabling and exploitation had finally been broken. The man who had spent 40 years engineering solutions to structural problems had finally applied those same principles to the most challenging construction project of my life, building boundaries strong enough to protect what truly mattered, while supporting what could still be saved. The law office of Carla Simmons occupied the second floor of a converted Victorian house in downtown Eugene, its warm wood paneling and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, creating an atmosphere that reminded Margaret of her library days. I appreciated the attorney's direct approach as she reviewed our situation with the clinical precision I recognized from my own engineering consultations. The snake incident, she explained, constituted criminal harassment at minimum, but our primary focus should be protecting our assets and ensuring my grandchildren's future security regardless of their parents' choices. The legal framework we constructed over the following weeks felt like the most important blueprint I had ever reviewed. A revocable trust would shelter our retirement savings, while guaranteeing Emma and Connor's educational expenses, removing any possibility that their inheritance could be squandered on gambling debts or failed business ventures. Restraining orders provided legal barriers against further harassment, while updated power of attorney documents ensured that only Margaret could make decisions on my behalf should my health decline. When Ethan and Lena arrived at our doorstep, 3 days after the documents were finalized, their fury was palpable even before they reached the front porch. I watched through the kitchen window as they approached, noting how my son's once familiar features had hardened into something almost unrecognizable. The entitled rage of someone whose manipulative tactics had finally met an immovable obstacle. This was the confrontation I had dreaded for months. Yet as I opened the door to face them, I felt only the calm certainty of a man who had finally chosen to protect what truly mattered. Their threats felt rehearsed, desperate attempts to resurrect old patterns of emotional blackmail that had once guaranteed my compliance. References to grandchildren who would grow up never knowing their grandfather. Promises of reconciliation, if only I would reconsider my selfishness. Accusations that my actions were destroying the family, All the familiar weapons deployed with increasing desperation as they encountered my unwavering resolve. My response was measured, informed by decades of engineering experience that had taught me the difference between structures that could be modified and those that required complete reconstruction. Some foundations were too damaged to repair, some relationships too poisoned by manipulation and entitlement to salvage. My love for Ethan remained, but it would no longer come at the expense of my marriage, my security, or my peace of mind. As evening settled over the lake, and silence returned to our home, I found myself on the familiar back porch. Where this journey had begun, the water reflected the last golden light of day, its surface unmarked by the turmoil that had finally passed. For the first time in decades, the future felt like something I could control. Thank you for being here. Don't forget to subscribe, and feel free to share your story in the comments. Every voice has value.